show too. Like if you don't feel the feelings, then you become them.
Hello, this is Through a Therapist's Eyes, the podcast, where you get insights in your home or in your car, but no, this is not the delivery of therapy services in any way. This is October the 14th, right?
Correct.
October
The 13th.
14th.
It's the 13th.
All right,
It's
it's the 13th. I'm a
the
day ahead because my clinical day is done. Listen, we are going to be talking about emotions, how they drive your day-to-day experience today. So think about these three questions. Are you aware of what or how your primary emotions are and drive you? Where do your emotions even come from? Think about it. And then understand what purposes your emotions might have for you. That and more we're going to talk about today. I think it'll be a pretty good conversation for sure. This might be a quote from Paul Rasmussen. I'll explain this in a little while, but I want to get it out in the beginning to see, again, a little bit of what we're going to be talking about. I think it's him. It could be somebody else. The critical essence of the human condition is movement through advancing time and changing circumstance with preference. We prefer validating outcomes that confirm our position of worth among others and strive to minimize the experience of challenge and burden. How we move defines the quality of our lives. So I thought that's pretty cool, and I'm going to describe what that means and whatnot here in a little bit, but Victoria's with us. Good evening, ma'am. How are you?
I'm doing well.
And Miss Kasie Morgan, still hanging. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Would you like to tell us about any No, I won't go there. Sorry, I'm going to let it go. Let it go.
Let it go. Let it go.
So I have that book out, Re-Understanding Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self. We are switching to YouTube in kind of time, I guess, right? So we're focusing a little bit on YouTube videos that I think that you really enjoy the YouTube channel. So we want to highlight that and push that a little bit. You have the subscribe button that I don't know if a lot of people know on YouTube that you can like subscribe, right? So it's just like any other podcast that you find on your outlets. You click the subscribe button, and then if you click the little bell that's on there, that helps you to know that there's a notification of, hey, we're live, we're there, just like Facebook. And then you also have the comments on YouTube. And we're very active on all the comments on all the social media platforms. Might even kind of start getting you guys involved in monitoring that and looking at that. That would be kind of fun, right?
Yeah. I
So
can't wait to have more responsibilities in my life.
Victoria, do you understand
Did
the
you?
sarcasm?
Whoa, did
I
he
didn't-
just about
I didn't
call
do-
me what I think he just
The
about
no
called
name.
me? Oh.
No, I
You about
didn't.
called her the no name.
Oh.
I didn't, but I didn't go.
Okay.
Yeah,
But I
you
didn't
corrected yourself in time.
I didn't
In
go.
time.
5 stars on Apple iTunes. Leave some comments. Spotify, LinkedIn, all those things. Contact at throughatherapiststyles.com is how you interact with us. This is the human emotional experience, and we do endeavor to figure this stuff out together. So what do you all think about Adlerian psychology?
I'm a fan.
Yeah?
Yeah. Is that surprising?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. Why would you think I'd think that's surprising?
I don't know, because I'm really rooted into like today's.
You're kind of on all the neurology
metascience
stuff
and neurology. Yeah.
The other training I'm doing was a polyvagal theory.
I love that.
I know you do. I know you do. Did they give you any Freud base his buddy Alfred Adler information in college, Victoria?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, can I recall that verbatim? No.
Can you recall that verbatim?
Definitely not. But I mean, I think I definitely use some Adlerian in my day-to-day.
I think that actually we all do more than therapists think that we do, honestly. And I got an awesome renewal of that. So, I've talked about on this show the conferences that I go to, and it's kind of like, OMG, I got to do another conference, and I'm prepared to be horribly bored and terrifyingly frustrated by the
Fix
whole
your hair.
experience.
I was
Fix
gonna
my
say.
hair.
Yes.
That better?
That's a little better. Yeah.
A little. Okay. What was it, sticking straight up?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now you got to tune into the YouTube to see Chris's hair sticking straight up in the air. Awesome. But anyway, I went to this conference down there, and it was fantastic. I was engaged the whole time. I was so glad. I love learning, and I love those kind of conferences. So this was the Adlerian Society in North Carolina that put this thing on. And so I got my brain just all enmushed again with the foundations of where my training actually kind of came from. So it was really refreshing.
Question.
Yes.
It was the North Carolinian Adlerian Society, but it took place in South Carolina.
Okay, then it was probably the South Carolina.
Okay, just questioning, like just a quick question.
Good point.
Of reference.
Yeah, if I'm going to reference, I probably should reference correctly, and you're absolutely on point. Thank you, ma'am.
No problem.
So this is a guy, Alfred Adler, that I think probably a lot of people have never heard of him, right? And that is so sad because people have heard of Sigmund Freud, like, a lot, right? Yeah. And what I've learned is, like, basically these guys were boys, right? Like, they were buddies. They were pals. And
were they besties?
No, they can't be besties. We covered this already, Kasie. we covered this already.
Sigmund Freud had a bestie.
No, he didn't. Guys, Victoria, do you believe boys can be besties? We'll cover it. We'll go there.
100%.
Thank you.
All right, we're just not doing this anymore. We're done with that. Really?
I mean, you probably wouldn't
100%
use
not.
the term, but like, yes,
Oh, well,
every
why
man
wouldn't-
that I know has a bestie.
Why wouldn't you use the term, Victoria?
The term what?
Bestie for dudes.
Well, I mean, like I'm gonna continue to use my husband as an example.
Be quiet,
Like,
Kasie.
he's not
Look
gonna
away.
refer to his best friend as a bestie.
No, he would not.
But-
Why? Without the but. Why?
I don't know, because he's weird.
No, he's not weird. He's a dude.
Are we gonna start stereotyping and
Go ahead,
what guys
Oh, you
should
got
and
your.
should
I
not
thought you had your mic
say?
down. Go ahead, Neil.
Guy friends aren't besties. That's just not bros, dudes, best friends. You can say that, but you don't say
I'm just
besties.
saying.
Okay, now that we've lost all the subscriptions we've ever had to YouTube channel, I'm going to pull us back to
Thank you.
Adlerian psychology with some facts about where this began. He was an Australian medical doctor, which I think is cool because my Hungarian and Australian, roots are celebrated here.
Austrian.
Who knew? Austrian, yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So, and psychotherapist. And the point is that he died in May 28th, 1937. So it's an interesting notion that really, if you really think about it, I've talked about this before, like our whole conceptual theme in the mental health field is really new.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
1937, like that's just yesterday. Right? So we haven't even been around for 100
grand
years if
scheme
you
of
think about it
things.
as an entire field.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we tend to forget that. So he was, interestingly, the first to emphasize the importance of the social element in the readjustment process of the individual. So a lot of the second half of what I call the tale of two tapes, biological side, social and emotional side, I've talked about that before on the show. So he's really over here. He's looking a lot at birth order and, relationships and foundational experiences, early recollections, and what your subconscious is doing with them. It's cool stuff.
Inner child work.
Well, not quite that. We're going to lose everybody if we go there, but sort of,
Sort of.
Yeah, really sort of. It's a really holistic approach. This is a cool thing to help you understand what we're dealing with here of Freud being in the analytical couch. Like people still every once in a very great while, but I've been asked like about 3 or 4 times in my career, like, should I lay down on the couch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you been asked that yet, Victoria?
Not yet. No.
It's gonna happen.
I've had someone get like comfortable where they like cross their legs up on the couch,
yeah,
but I haven't had
sure.
anyone be like, "Hey,
Should
can I lay down?"
How many times have you been asked, Victoria or Kasie?
Probably like 6 or 7
Oh,
times.
that many
in my career,
times?
yeah.
Really? I've only had like 3 or
Yeah,
or
definitely
so.
people that haven't had a therapy experience before when they come in and see a
Right,
couch. They're like,
right.
"Do I, like, lay down or how does this
That
work?"
is hysterical. I've only had it like 3 times, as far as I can recall. But he moved us from the analytical couch in favor of the 2 chairs.
Mm-hmm.
Like literally transitioned Freud stuff into like a lot of what we do, which is the foundational aspect, getting back to our topic, emotions and how they drive us day to day. So it's really, really cool stuff. I invite you to look into Adlerian stuff for any therapist listening out there to really reinvigorate, what it is that we're talking about. I was talking with John last night about this. Unfortunately, John Pope's not with us tonight. He's got his scheduling together for next week. But basically, it's really refreshing because John looked at saying psychotherapy has become so manualized, was his statement. Like, I wish he was here with us today to be able to talk about the depth of what he's experienced, of how many years he's been practicing, right?
Right.
It has changed. And I have concerns about for the not so good in a lot of ways.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Are you going to expound upon that?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Or should I?
I mean, that's up to you, but I mean,
How
I
do
was
you
just
take
curious.
that? Why is that surprising to you?
Because I feel like psychotherapy over like the course of time that I've been in the field has really like surpassed my expectations. Recognizing early on that I agree with Dr. Pope that it was very manualized, like when I was in graduate school, and then when you get in the field, I think there's a whole new exploration of what it looks like. And the reason why I am a proponent of Adlerian psychology is because I believe in the social conversation that happens in therapy. And I think it's now being explored even further. I mean, with the advancements in telehealth and things that you're able to do, and be able to meet people where they are, no matter where they are. And I don't know, I really feel like there's been a lot of progression there. A lot of talks about mental health are now being broached across all facets of life. Like the Carolina Panthers, our hometown football NFL team, has an LPC on staff. Like,
Wow. I
Oh,
didn't know that.
absolutely.
so I think
So let
things
me-
like that are
let me
progressing.
Jump in and back up in so far as, yes, that, like, I've talked about the progression of awareness in our society. That is absolutely cool. And I think that's around the world. And interesting that maybe I'm going back and then in the middle, and then now where we are is getting back to that a little bit, quite possibly, because I liked John's quote. Psychotherapy has become so manualized. That's what his quote was when we were talking last night. And that's not good because it takes away all those things. And so interestingly enough, I wonder if really in the last 3-4 years, we've kind of started to come back as a field to some of those things. Because when I started in 97 or 2000, right, like that was a lot more ingrained. Like my supervisors were like psychodynamic supervisors.
Sure.
They were analysts. We don't
Right.
use those terms anymore very much.
Oh, yeah.
Would you agree, Victoria?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's decreased a little bit. I mean, I definitely think that what I'm experiencing now in practice is not necessarily correlate to some of the things that we learned in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
As
Fair
far
enough,
as that,
yeah.
like, background. And, I mean, obviously they teach it to us so that we know it. But, I mean, I don't think a lot of that stuff is used as frequently.
Because when we start
Now.
talking about emotions on a day-to-day, on a real reality level now, it really is about that social interaction. We know that in, psychotherapy practices, the rapport and the relationship is one of the most important things to document and empirically research progress. That's a key component
Yeah, I think
beyond any manualized whatever that you're operating from.
absolutely. And I think what's really helped us in that area is that the division between like the medical model of straight up just medicine and the functional model of like psychotherapy and the integrative process of trying to marry those two together has really helped forward that venture. So now when you go to the doctor, because you used to go to the doctor and say maybe you're having symptoms of depression or anxiety, and like their answer was to give you a pill and send you out the door.
Right.
Yeah.
And now when you go to the doctor, sometimes depending on what doctor you go to, you can see a behavioral health provider that day. They suggest you get involved with therapy. The doctors
Right.
are communicating with the therapist. We're having like a whole systems approach to the functionality of how is this manifesting in your whole life.
Oh, it's
instead of
definitely becoming
just-
vogue.
Yeah,
it's in
yeah.
vogue.
And so I think it's no longer just like a niche.
Definitely not
of-
you're
of
crazy, go to
people.
see this guy.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think because of that, general practitioners are becoming more comfortable in addressing mental health in sessions with their primary care patients, and they're building relationships in the community where there used to be a division. And so I think that integrative process has really forwarded this concept of emotions are a real thing that we have to interface with on a daily basis.
Right.
Well,
And how does that manifest in your life?
yeah, and we were just having a conversation, what was it, yesterday, about EAP and
You
how
and I were, yeah.
like and how just we've seen like a huge increase in people using EAPs, which means saying that
It's one of the
like
COVID outcomes. Yeah.
yeah, and well also I think that kind of helps.
An EAP is Employee Assistance Program. There
That's
are
correct.
programs where you go to your employer to engage therapy. Yeah.
Right, but I think that it kind of like the integration of the medical and behavioral health side, also the integration in like the workplace and being more like accepting of those emotions and feelings that you
We
experience.
don't hide
because
them,
of
and
work.
we don't
Yeah.
run from them as much as we used to, and so that's why I think this title is going to be catchy and catch people's eye and listen to this because it drives day to day like real experiences
for sure.
that people are having, and we want to get in and understand those a little bit because I think that people are still mystified by this stuff. Honestly, crazy confused about what is my emotions and how do they drive me. Like, this is an intriguing title, right? I can just imagine you listening out there, right? Like, you're saying, well, I don't even know what my emotions are, and to understand how they're driving me day to day. Like, what do you got to say about that? So let's get into this a little bit and process through this. So the fundamental questions that I want to start with is, what do they really do for us? Why do we have them in the first place? What is really going on in the purpose of, emotions? Just if you think of, and we talked about this a lot during this conference that I was at, from an Adlerian perspective, it really gets right at the core of this from very early on in life.
Right.
And if you think about the emotional development of mankind and babies in our life cycle development, could we function without emotions? Could you imagine what it would be like if we just developed intellectually in some way or didn't have the limbic system? Like, that would be crazy functioning, wouldn't it? It'd be like the
Yeah.
Borg in Star Trek or something, like
Yeah, Spock.
Spock. Did you know that Vulcans are actually highly emotional species? But they don't want to be all over the place, and so they create massive logic to resist all of that. It's almost like full stoicism. Did you?
So sorry, I did not nerd out right then, but thank you for that explanation.
Well, it was helpful for me because
Wait a
I
minute.
have
Did
no
I
idea.
speak things that you already know, or what?
No, I didn't really know that, but
Okay.
that's awesome.
I don't know if she's making fun of me, Victoria, or not right now. Which one
Live
is
long
it?
and prosper, friends.
I mean, come on. Jeez. What happened there? All right.
That's awesome though. Like, that's cool. But yeah, I do think that would be a hard existence, right? I do think that there are people that experience maybe what we call like neurodivergency, that sometimes have impaired like empathetic systems in the brain, that they do function a lot out of the analytical brain and out of a non-emotional brain and a very rational brain. And I think that, they struggle sometimes with understanding social situations, or like primarily when I think of like the autism spectrum, and everything's on a spectrum. So not every person with autism struggles in that way. But I do think that some people that are on the autism spectrum do often struggle emotionally and socially in situations because they don't understand, or they don't empathize, or they don't, speak the same emotional language as other people.
Absolutely. Victoria, let me put you on the spot. I don't know if you saw the
Okay.
notes or not, but what would you say emotions like do for us, just from a very basic perspective, right? Like,
Emotions for me or in my opinion, I guess, emotions help tell others what we need, help tell ourselves what we need, or what we're lacking, or what we're looking for. And And I feel like emotions are a form of communication.
Perfect. Yeah. No, you're absolutely on point. Now, did you look at all the notes or just check
No,
things out
that
in
was
advance?
I'm gonna
You are
pat myself on the back for that.
point.
That
Big
was
old brains over here.
On
Got
point.
Big old brains next to me.
Think about this from like a baby's perspective, listening in your car or in your home, right? Emotions give us existential personal feedback, just like you said, Victoria. Secondly, they really convey communication. And then thirdly, they really engage action that we need to take. Like they trigger, they stimulate, they create movement. And that gets back a little bit to what I think was Paul Rasmussen's. He was a presenter, well-known guy in the Adlerian circles, I believe. And, you know, his quote was talking about a lot of that from an Adlerian perspective, like ground level, bottom line emotions and how they create movement for us, action and engaging. It's like a baby. They don't know these arbitrary, crazy things that we created. We literally just created words. But you know, I mean, you're a new mom, right?
I was literally just about to say,
Right?
my 6-month-old.
He tells
He's
you
not speaking
exactly
words.
what needs to happen, right?
Yeah, and he does it through emotions.
Yeah.
Like he's
Yeah.
hungry, he has a certain cry. If he wants to be picked up, he has a certain like whine about it. And
new
like,
parents understand these
Yeah,
different.
and so-
you begin to read it. It's
Right.
amazing.
So if he didn't have those emotions or a way of expressing those emotions,
It'd die.
he
wouldn't function.
Basically, yeah,
He would die.
because I wouldn't know what he needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's powerful when you really get at why human beings developed and created this and engaged with this stuff. And then it also just about ourselves. We teach ourselves. The emotions are reflecting, you know, like in our experience, what it is that we need to be aware of, what it is that we're operating with, what it is that we need to be alarmed with. Kasie, you're talking about trauma all the time. You know, like that alarm goes off in our emotional system because it's telling us something.
I think I'm going to have so many TV references from time to time.
Okay,
So there's this episode of The Fairly Odd Parents where Timmy Turner, I can't remember, he asked to like have no fear or have no feelings or like something like that. But I think fear was a specific one.
What is
And
this, like a fictional or a T or
It's a cartoon.
It's a
magical-
cartoon.
It's a cartoon. Thank you.
Okay.
I don't do cartoons at this point.
Anyways,
He's
so
old.
he has fairy godparents who
Okay.
who grant him wishes.
Okay.
And he wished for like no fear or no emotions or something like that. And they get to a point in the episode like he's about to walk into a volcano, like an active volcano, because he literally has no fear. Like he has no
Right.
nothing.
Right.
And
That's it.
like so then eventually he gets them back and whatever. But like it's just an interesting. I'd have to go back and rewatch
To
it
try to
now.
function
but yeah,
that way
but
would
like
been-
like to
would been
function
comical.
without just those basic even emotions and like being able to. I mean, even what kind of danger that would put yourself in if you literally had no fear, like.
They really
Walking down
got
the
me to be back steeped into like the fact that, and here's almost a quote, right? I was thinking for you, Neil, like what quote could we make out of this? All emotions. Here's a quote. All emotions have purpose. How about that? Right? All emotions have purpose, and purpose is not bad, so it's inherently good, right? Because we were talking about how all emotions are good. There are no bad emotions because emotions absolutely trigger what it is that you're trying to get to, your desired state, your movement. And this is where Adlerian psychology gets at. What is your emotion? What's your memories? How does that factor into what you're moving to get to a desired state? That's the whole flow of how we're in operation from day to day.
Yeah, and I would agree with that to an extent that having emotions are a good
I think I know where you're
thing.
going, and I
don't-
like it.
I don't want to stunt that progression for people and say like you shouldn't have emotions, but
Right.
sometimes our emotions lie to us.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
They
Very
lie to
true.
us because they're trying to keep us safe. And that safety is created from those memories that Adlerian addresses. And so, that any therapist would address is that sometimes the emotions that we're experiencing or re-experiencing are based out of a place of safety. And it's not always towards something that needs that level of emotion.
Can you give an
That
example?
is an
Yeah.
interesting debate before we go. And I'm almost, Kasie, debating myself, right? I love that you just brought up the other quote that, emotions lie to us, because we've said that before in the show, and it's true. But it's interesting to reevaluate that from this perspective that I've got in my mind with all of this content that I buzzed up in my mind. They do lie to us, but at the same time that they're operating on something that isn't necessary or learned dangerous, but it isn't really dangerous. That's like the lie, right? But at the same time that it's kind of quote air quotes lying to us, is it still moving us to a desired state in a way that it doesn't realize the way we want it to go? I don't know if that.
Yeah,
I didn't
I
say
don't-
that well.
I don't
but
think that if they're lying to us, if it's a situation where emotions are lying to us to keep us safe, we're typically not going to what I would perceive to be a desired state. I think it typically puts us into a survival state, and sometimes that's beneficial, and sometimes it's not beneficial. And so I think, like, just as an example, so if I'm like in the cafeteria and they're not serving bacon that morning, like if I'm a little kid and they're not serving bacon that morning and I have a complete meltdown, teachers might be like, what is going on? Like,
Right.
why are you having a complete meltdown? Well, if food scarcity is something that I'm consistently worried about, and that's something that isn't present for me, and then I get to the cafeteria and there's no more bacon, I might have a complete meltdown based on what's going on. So it's disproportionate in putting me in a survival state when that's not necessarily the desired state that I want to be in. And so I think that things like that, when we're emotionally focused and our emotions are driving us, we have to often try to slow that process down and ask ourselves, where is this coming from? Just because sometimes our emotions lie to us.
Yeah, I'm gonna
what
move
you're
on
saying.
with some of other
Sure.
segments, because you've triggered thoughts in me, and I love that. I wish I would have been thinking about that over the course of this conference and all that I was in, because I've got some questions and doubts, and not necessarily doubts. It's
I
like
don't
how
doubt it,
how
but
do we
yeah.
move with these different things? And this is, by the way, perfect, because there is no model that works. Right back to the
Right.
what we were talking about before.
Exactly.
There's no perfect fit for all, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think, Neil, it's still a good quote, without objections of the forum. Like, all emotions have purpose. I think that's does that
yeah.
sound right?
Just like
it
every
has-
behavior has a function.
Right.
All emotions have purpose.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So let's stay with that, Neil, on our long list of quotes that we want to use. But moving on to the next section, right? Fundamental question, what do they do for us? They give us communication. They create motion and action, right? And they create feedback to ourselves. What are two categories of emotions? I thought this concept was cool because it triggers the movement, the motion that we're trying to get to. So the way they broke this down was validating emotions and compelling emotions. So validating emotions are really like the outcomes that we seek in the experiences that we have. It's the drive day to day to day. That's
Right.
what we're looking for. It's what we're striving for. They indicate, like a job well done. They're the success. They're those validation moments, those pleasing experiences. And we're all looking for those. It's all those things that you would consider to be in a desired state. And here's what's interesting. They call this the 20%. Right? The 20%. And the other emotions that we're focused on are the ones that compel. They create the energy. They're creating that push. So things that must be dealt with. This is the forcefulness of our emotional systems, forcing us to deal with something or forcing us to do something. It's like get uncomfortable so that you can move, and then you get the validating emotions, the connection. So Victoria, your baby, for instance, has this fear that is there, and they yell out, and they're trying to get to this desired state, which is your beautiful smiling face of reassurance to this little baby, right?
Oh yeah, I walk around the corner where he can't see me, and it's like all heck is broken loose.
It's a
He's like,
problem.
I mean, that's part of also because he's at the stage where if he doesn't see it, he doesn't think it exists. But
Right, developmentally, there are
right,
things that
developmentally,
the
and
brain's
so, but yeah,
doing.
I mean, or if I'm in the room and he like his need is to be comforted and to be held for whatever reason at that time, then he like reaches his arms up and he cries and he
This is the movement.
Yeah.
This
He
is the
signals.
engagement.
Yeah.
You know, emotions, like, it's funny, right? Like, oh, and by the way, these compelling emotions, they call them the 80%. That's why, you know, human beings are so negative, it seems. You know, I hear people jadedly saying this and whatnot. Well, these emotions of anxiety and ambivalence and fear and all of these types of things that are, you know, they're not the desired state, but they're very, very helpful for you in a lot of ways. And there's some examples of why. But
Yeah, I often tell people when they come in and want help with anxiety, I often reiterate the fact that we never want to get rid of all anxiety.
yeah,
Right?
right, absolutely.
Anxiety keeps us alive.
I do that all the time too.
Yeah,
right?
like we never want to get rid of all of our anxiety. You know, we just want to manage it, and that's really what I think you're talking about in the management of emotions and trying to have movement towards something to get towards a desired state. The desired state in that case, and I think maybe you're going to talk about this in a little bit, but the desired state in that case is I want to be able to manage my anxiety so that I know when to react and not when to react, right? And when to move in one direction instead of another and not feel like I'm unsafe all the time.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. Like, it's funny to me. Buddy, I got to quote you. The truth is, I quote you oftentimes with this particular quote. It's a personal friend of mine. You know who you are out there, Adrian. He tells me.
That's Chris's bestie.
Yeah, no, it is not.
You almost said yes.
I
You
know it
almost
is
said yes.
not.
Okay, sorry.
Anyways.
And I had a conversation with him about that. I think he agrees with Neil and I. You guys know nothing. But anyway.
No, nothing.
It's like going to therapy is taking your finger and jabbing yourself repeatedly in your eyeball is what a lot of times people feel, right? Or fear, right? Because we're dealing with emotions, right? And who wants to deal with that?
I mean, yeah, I get a lot of half of my clients, right? Well, not half, but I have a number of clients that, you know, they're in therapy because they want to be validated that they're not crazy or that the
Sure.
feelings that they're feeling are valid and that, you know, what they're experiencing is valid.
Right. And it's happening all the time. You know, it's amazing to me too, people that are fearful of emotions, and then secondly, like, you come across people that are like, "Oh yeah, I'm not very emotional. I just, you know, I don't really experience a lot. It's not a big deal for me," and it drives me nuts. And this is one of the big focus points that I've created in the book, Re-Understanding Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self, because we are emotional every single moment of every single day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you walk into a room, your eyes give your brain visual acuity as to whether or not the space is safe or not.
Immediately.
And then your brain decides for you what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. And you know what it does next? It activates your nervous system.
Yup.
And that nervous system generates your emotions and your feelings.
That's what they
There you
are.
go.
You know, and it really, and we've talked about this on the show too. I mean, if you think about sort of getting back to the segment of what they are, I don't think we even nearly understand all of these things, because that is the simplisticness of what we can say. The depth of what we can do under that is like hundreds of hormones, minerals, and vitamins, and metal, electricity, all of our system. That's what we feel. It's such an amazing creation that this body is that you have. And all of those dynamic things, whether you're feeling numb or dumb or afraid or elated, there's so many variations in the way that we're operating, and it is what drives us day to day.
Yeah. Did you know that people that experience high levels of anxiety, that they literally have done biofeedback on their bodies and their nerve endings are literally located closer to their skin? like closer to the outer epidermis.
I did
of the
not know
skin.
that, but I would believe that. It makes
Yeah,
And
that
perfect
does
so
kinda make
sense.
sense.
environmentally, like you even have a higher chance of having higher anxiety just because your nerve endings are located just closer to your skin and your body.
And you know what? We'll go into that because there might be a dynamic understanding that we don't have yet about what your emotions are doing. If it sees something in your life, your spirit, I like to say your subconscious, right? That's speaking to you. It might literally create biological differences that way because it has chronically interpreted accurately. Yes, sometimes they lie to us, but accurately, like, hey, this needs to engage now. This body, this system, this organization. I loved, what was the movie? Victoria, you might be able to pull it, the Emotions movie with the baby and the brain.
Inside Out.
Inside Out. Love it.
Yeah, great movie.
Why they did not do a sequel yet pisses me off.
I think they're coming out.
They're coming out
Yeah,
with
they're
they
coming out
have
with a sequel.
got to, because that perfectly describes or defines it, like, not describes, creates. What does that do?
It
Trying
depicts.
to say that it depicts, perfect word. Thank you for the saving. Totally depicts what's
You're
going
welcome.
on in the brain. It's amazing.
Yeah, and how it drives us. Like literally, they're driving the brain in that movie, right?
Yeah.
It's a great film if you haven't checked it out. Inside Out. It's a Pixar film. It's great. I also think that biologically understanding how our bodies operate and adjust can be attributed to when your brain is in like a hyper state of arousal or excited or in a survival state, depending on your situation. It often reacclimates itself to that being your norm. So I think you're very much onto something that with evolution of the body, that if your active state has been hyperarousal of the hypothalamus and the amygdala in the brain, which is that fire alarm of the brain that we often talk about, and it stays in that state for a long period of time because what you're enduring, and I'm thinking about people who are in like civil war situations throughout our nation, or not our nation, but throughout the world and things like that, where it's just chronic acute stress on the nervous system, then what happens with our brain is it reassimilates itself to saying like, this is your norm. So sometimes it can even feel uncomfortable for it to be relaxed. And so that's when you find
Which
that
seems
our
backwards.
it does
Yeah,
seem
does,
backwards,
but I get it.
But you see that a lot. I see it a lot when I work with people who maybe have been in domestic violence situations. That they start picking partners after they get out of the domestic violence situation. They want more chaotic types of partners moving forward because it's uncomfortable. The stability feels uncomfortable. If I'm not in that constant state, my body starts to seek it out because that's where I feel the most comfortable. I've also seen it in my personal life as a therapist, right? So vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue, whatever you want to call it, when you work in a human service industry, for those of you who are first responders or chronically interfacing with the day-to-day ongoings of society that's both the sublime and the really, really upsetting, your brain reassimilates to how you feel and how you become activated to what people tell you. And I will never forget this as long as I live, when I was running ER and listening to people's trauma stories, and I was just blowing through sexual trauma questions when they were responding with, yes, I've experienced sexual trauma. I'm moving on to like, okay, so do you use nicotine? Like when I caught myself
Right.
transitioning between those questions, I realized like it came into very sharp focus
Yeah.
that I was really desensitized
Yeah.
to some of this information because my brain has reassimilated itself around the shock factor when someone tells you that, if you're
Right.
in this line of
Let's
work
just
for
pause
so
there
long.
because I think we have a lot of therapists that do listen to the show and check things out. And for new therapists as well as therapists that have gotten in a little while, that's a good, really teaching moment, Kasie.
It
And thank you
is.
for the courage
Sure.
to share your own process with that. I snickered and laughed a little bit because I've been there, right? You do, need to realize like the emotion of what it is that we're dealing with when they're relaying these stories and these experiences, and you really do get kind of desensitized and you almost kind of forget, and then you're like, yeah, well, let me go. I have questions to ask on my assessment.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have put my whole process down. Like I've been doing this so long that I've got like a whole thing. It's just. And I move with the conversation. It's an art to it. It's amazing to be able to engage. And they give me informations, and I move around on all my questions and get stuff, because I'm getting the big picture. But sometimes I've just completely abandoned that. And I want to give therapists permission. I know you got, complicated challenges with, well, what diagnosis do I have to figure out, and what information do I need to get, and I need to do a good job by, as going back to what John said, right? Like, what was it?
Manualizing that.
Manualizing.
Yeah.
I was saying monitoring. Manualizing
Mm-hmm.
our care. No, you know what? Throw that shit away. Stop and understand that what you're doing is being with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
and what emotion they're having at the moment, and just be present.
I love that, because that, in essence, sorry, Victoria.
No,
if I
you're good. Go
overtalked you.
ahead. Go ahead.
But that, in essence, is everything I believe like Adlerian really wanted, was the concept of presence, right?
Right.
And when your
Yes.
emotional systems are hijacked by situations, when your emotions are lying to you, when your emotions are overactive because of what's going on in the environment, yes, it creates movement. But what it also creates is a situation where it makes it harder for you to be present. And so I think you have to tap in to where are my emotions right now, because it will prevent you from being operational in the present moment if they force you in to focusing on the future or force you back to refocusing on the past. So I think that is one important distinction from earlier when we were talking about like emotions and things like that. And I said
Yeah.
emotions lie to you. That's one distinction that I think can happen sometimes, is that you want to be able to function from a place of presence. So if your emotions are bumping you out from being present, that is something to focus on and to work through and to realize, like, how do I get myself back into regulation?
You know what's interesting with that debate that just occurred to me? Emotions lie to us versus they always have purpose, and they're pushing to a direction of a desired state. When we're not paying attention, this is going to be twisted, okay? But bear with me for just a moment, because it gets at what drives us day to day, right? Our emotions, how are they driving us? Isn't it like possible, because people are afraid of their emotions, they don't want their emotions to be present, that
Okay.
in reality, when the times come up where the emotions are more likely, air quotes, right, like lying to us, are those the emotions that we're almost triggering to counteract the balance of the emotions that we don't really want to be in. I wonder if there's some of that goes on in sort of an intermingled double bind, right? Like the emotions are having two purposes at once. Does that make any sense?
It does, but I also think that what happens is what we call blocking, right?
Well, that's
Right.
essentially okay. Yeah,
The
right.
brain senses the overactivation of the nervous system and then immediately blocks. And I think that that's what happens a lot when people come into my office.
Right, and that's
because-
like the lie kind of part, right? Like,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, because people will say like I'm dissociating like in moments and things
Which
like
association's a big part of that. Yeah,
it is, and that's really what's happening. Is it's like even if you think about this medically, right? You have a surgery, then they give you nerve block when you have the surgery, right? Because they want you to not have to experience the traumatic pain that is happening to your body, so they give you a nerve blocker. And then you get out of surgery, you're like, I feel great, like everything's fine.
Yeah.
And then you go home, and as that nerve block wears off more and more and more each day, you're like,
Right.
oh my gosh, because now you're feeling everything.
absolutely.
And if you think about that, that's kind of how our emotions work. Our brain senses that our nervous system is overactivated. It starts to block. And then as that block goes further and further away from where we're protected in that moment, we start to feel everything. And sometimes it can be like a sense of flooding.
So let's go. So where we're at so far is what emotions are, where they come from, right? Like what their purpose is. So taking a break to think a moment, again, our questions, right? Are you aware of what you feel and how you feel? Where do they come from? Understanding what our purpose of the emotions are. Those are some of the questions that we had. And I think we're doing a good job moving through that. I want to do a little section then as well now on how life experiences create those. So just think about these things for a moment. And this we'll just do a short segment. I want the both of you to think about these as I read through the different things where they came from, my little list. Which, by the way, moving back just a little bit, Victoria, just so we learn how I do this. Sometimes my brain will go off on that little skip that I just did.
I got it.
Right? Like,
I'm
and
good.
because I love thinking in a moment and creating. And I
good.
want to invite
Yeah.
you guys to do that as well. I know, Kasie,
I'm keeping up.
I know you will and do.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, how they teach us. So think about what we talked about in emotion-focused therapy last time we met. I want to go back to something that I didn't get to talk about about layering. That's the only thing I want to spend some specific time on. But then think about the cultural influences in what your emotions are and how you're operating. Think about your family's culture and what your family does, how your family does, what your family does. Like, that has a big influence. Think about the positive, validating influences of people that are in your life, that grandma or that uncle, your favorite aunt. These are figures that have an indelible imprint on your life. Cultural influence, experiences that compel. Right? These are things that you remember. That's why when we do this in therapy, we're looking at early recollections and what does that mean, right? These things all move around. And I want you to just think for a minute about how that operates. It makes me sad, Kasie, because I think of when we were talking about mass shootings, one of the things that are universal, you said, and I think you were on point, is somebody that has zero adult connection that's validating their emotional existence. Think about that. Think about that. How does emotions drive your day-to-day? Well, dang, in a real negative way there. Scary. So much so that babies die when they don't have that nurturance and touch,
Yeah.
in nurseries. This is how powerful they can drive you day to day. So we take the good and we take the bad, right?
And then
there
you
we
have the facts of life.
Yes. I
You
love
know
it.
what that show is?
Dang it.
Oh,
Dang it, dang it. Watch
Lord.
the Family Channel. But I love that, and I'm glad you joined me on that. I did that purposefully because I love the way that they engaged that in that show in the 80s. It's an 80s show,
What is
Victoria, called The Facts of Life, where
it? Oh.
kids were taken
Yeah, I
care
have
of
no
by
idea
this
what
mom.
that is. Sorry.
So think about those indelible imprints. What is my thoughts offering for you, Victoria and Kasie, when you think about how all these things operate together there?
Go for it, Kasie.
I just
Yeah, you were cheesing a
no,
little
I
bit. but-
automatically go back to so I don't know if I've ever talked about him on the show, but in my family of origin, I have a stepfather, right, and he is one that practically like raised me with my mom and everything, and
Okay.
I love him. He's wonderful. And
Yeah.
so I played basketball. And if you've ever noticed my stature, I don't think I've ever stood up on camera. I'm not very tall and I'm also not very fast.
Okay.
So never have been, never will be. Like that's just the facts of life.
Okay.
And so,
Take the good.
so in basketball, like just this will be a real quick anecdote, but in basketball, you're usually either a guard or a forward or the center. Definitely not the center, not tall enough. Definitely not fast enough to really be a guard. So I would become what we would call like a small forward or a forward. Well, in that position, I'm playing against people that are like 6 feet tall in high school. Okay. And I'm 5'5" on a good day.
Yeah.
So anyhow, my dad would take me outside and teach me how to be tough and play basketball. And I will never forget this as long as I live. If things would hurt, he would look at me, and this is part of my culture today, and he would say, "Is it a hurt or is it an injury?"
Yep. Love
And-
it. Right?
Yeah. And
I-
There's
that
some teaching that goes on there.
yeah, because it helped me learn the difference between something like temporary pain and something that is more than painful, that needs addressing and needs assistance. And so even today, I find myself asking my kids, is it a hurt or an injury?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is
get
that
it.
where your daughter got her basketball skills? Where you had her she pushed another kid?
No, she hip tossed that kid.
Oh, yeah, that's what it
y'all.
was.
She hip tossed him.
And I think that to stay with this little segment a little bit longer, and I wanted to go back and cover the emotion-focused therapy component because it was a very important part that we didn't get to cover that goes with this. The idea here is with this little segment that life experiences, like you just shared, and thank you for sharing it. It's a beautiful, and we can. I think all of us will listen to you talking there, and I thought of multiple different interactions with me to my kids, and in imprints that I've had from experiences. Remember we were talking about with the emotion-focused therapy. You have engulfment and abandonment.
Right.
These are primary insecurities that operate with that model, and you have layering that occurs. And so you fall on the razor's edge. Why are we on one side or the other is a question I always get with that, and I can't answer it because it's so early on. I guess the baby and whatever you fall on one side or the other. But then once you have that imprint of particular fear on one side or the other, you will go through life experiences, and I call it layering. These life experiences drive your emotions to tell you what to be harmed by and to how to avoid it. And so you'll see all kinds of situations that you're overrun and criticized, and that's the engulfment side. You'll also see all sorts of experiences through life where you're abandoned, where you're not treated as valued or important. Why do we clue in on one or the other of the categories is what I want to hit at. Because we have an interaction with the environment. We have an interaction with these life experiences. And for somebody who's in the abandonment camp, you probably disregarded because those engulfment experiences weren't that fearful for you. Whereas somebody who's in the engulfment camp, you really didn't worry about the abandonment fear moments that got tricked off all throughout your life cycle. But when you have one or the other, you notice all of the ones that you're particularly concerned with. So we didn't get to talk about that last time, and it fit with this experience of where life experiences interact with your emotions day to day.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense because if you really delve into that further and you think about kind of the characteristics that we covered last time, what I think you begin to find is that this is not, and I've said this on the show before, this is not about what's wrong with you. It has everything to do with what has happened to you, within you, and around you.
And we build off of that with the idea that emotions oftentimes, if not always, have that purpose.
Yep.
Right.
And that's right. And
so we can embrace them.
Yeah, we just have to embrace them
right.
and interface with them, because what happens if we avoid them is that in the temporary, we will stave off emotional pitfalls.
Yep.
But in the long term, they will come back and bite us in the rear.
Absolutely. Victoria, what were you thinking?
Did you say uh-oh?
I was playing off of her.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you saw a bug or something. I was about to. Okay. And you looked at the ground over
Come on,
here.
we had a thing going there.
Uh-oh.
Did you not catch the spider?
I'm out.
Victoria, we left you a little bit. I mean, I want to check in with you and
sorry,
see.
Victoria.
No, I completely agree, and I actually recently saw from this. I follow this other therapy practice called the Expansive Group.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they just put on Instagram or whatever the other day about how you have to feel your feelings in order to move on with your life. In order to get through whatever you're going through, you have to actually feel your feelings.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
and you can't expect to make progress therapeutically in life or whatever if you don't address those feelings, if you don't feel them.
I think honestly, Victoria, it's just like we were saying there. It's just an allowance. They don't even have to. You get to decide what your legs do. You get to decide what your mouth says. You absolutely are in control of yourself in a lot of ways. I mean, I know in some ways we're not, but without way overanalyzing that, ladies. Right? If you allow emotions to be present with you, you still have choices. And I think people get fearful of that. And so you're right. You can't grow without allowing that. You can't understand without allowing that. Yeah, go ahead.
I tell my students all the time that the feelings you have are valid. What you're experiencing is valid, even sometimes when your feelings lie to you. It's what you do with those feelings. It's how you respond to those feelings. It's how you act. If you're feeling angry, I was literally just talking to a kid about this today.
Okay.
If you're feeling angry and you have options, right? You can flip the table. You can throw the chair. You can punch a hole in the wall.
Right.
Whatever. But what kind of outcome, what kind of consequences are those going to bring? But if we go the other way, we take our deep breaths, we communicate that we're feeling angry, we feel the anger, but what we do with that is what matters, and
what understanding we get from it.
Right. And what it means,
what it means,
what we're trying to communicate when we're feeling that anger.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've said it before on the show too. If you don't feel the feelings, then you become them. And I think that
Mhm.
that is the biggest difference, I believe, between Adler or Adlerian theory and psychodynamic, right? Is that Freud would say, you become them.
Yeah.
And Adler would say,
Yeah, well, hold on.
like, hold on a second. Like, you
Right.
can feel them, process through to not have to become them.
Right. We won't go. We don't have time to go
No,
into
but
that. But
still,
that
yeah,
that is
yeah.
that is a perfect little spot. And if you're a therapist listening out there, dive into that and think about that and research that, because that's really on point. Or if you're just interested in emotional things, because that is a big push and pull between the way that those things really work. But we have to move on. Let's move on to a very short section. I was thinking about, I need to blow this off, but I don't want to. Right? Because it's a spot of understanding, and I think this is where we get to as well, Kasie, where emotions can lie to us. We do know that there are mental health conditions, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's a biological, predisposed, genetic realities that we're learning about now. It's such a dynamic thing because of some of the emotional groundswell of what we're talking about here can be chronic in your life, that the emotions can create themselves into a condition. I know that there's a dynamic interplay between all of these things, but I just want to give a little bit of credence, because in my Tale of Two Tapes, I look at the biological side and then the social and emotional side. And a lot of this Adlerian stuff really is on this side. I said at the stop of the show. But I just want to give credence that I think that when you're born genetically predisposed to your body's operating with these chemicals in the way that it does, with just say bipolar or with OCD, there's such an interplay, and I just want to have that as a mention today. Does that?
Yeah, and I think that to even go back to earlier in the podcast when we were talking about the manualization and the progression of psychotherapy, I think that is one big area, is that before, and maybe you experienced this when we were looking at assessments, right? We didn't always include like gestation of the mother and,
No, right.
and things like
Yeah.
that. But what we know is now sometimes even in utero,
It's a factor.
the stress that is supplied to the mother during pregnancy and gestation of the fetus has an impact on the nervous system of that baby.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of have you sung? Did you guys talk to your baby when he was in utero, Victoria? Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
You're
we read
singing
books.
and you're
We did.
talking and you literally read books to your baby who's not born yet. Absolutely, that is important connection, and they know your voice, right?
They do. Yeah.
They come out in this world and they see all this crazy shit going on all around them with lights and darkness and everything. And then they hear that voice again. Like, yeah, this stuff, yeah, I could go on and on with that.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that's one progression is now we include that in like
An assessment.
an assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I think you're right. Absolutely. So let's look a little bit. Did we cover? Yeah, we have to be so brief with that. But thank you for giving validation to that honorable mention.
I
that
hope your
wanted to do.
emotions are okay.
They are examples of emotions and how they work. All right. I thought it was cool. Actually, I don't like handouts and stuff very often, but I want to use this because this was interesting in what they created. And I don't know. I guess this is Paul Rasmussen again. I'm going to give him credit. He was an awesome instructor. Well, if you're listening, Mr. Rasmussen, Dr. Rasmussen, you're supposed to be emailing me back so we can have you on the show. But I'll leave that alone.
I don't have that paper.
For now. I know, because I didn't want you to have it.
Oh, thanks.
Right? So
Yeah,
here's what I
preach.
want you to do. They looked at these emotions, and Victoria, they took the emotion and looked at what the movement is and what it does. And I don't have time to go through all of them, but I want you to stop me when you hear one that's interesting that you want to hear the way they go with it. Here's an example.
Okay.
Right? Anxiety is one that people use a lot, and I've already thought about this a lot, right? So this is the battle emotion. And listen to the way they give this description of anxiety and how it creates movement.
Okay.
Right? The emotion that for loose ends. Anxiety energizes us so that we can deal with the current threat to our physical or psychological well-being, similar to the fear, but differs by occurring in more ambiguous circumstances. rather than in response to something specific. So you see how they're giving it really cool depiction of like not a definition of anxiety, but like how it creates movement. So here's what I want to do. You both get to choose one. I'm going to read down through these emotions, and you choose one that's interesting. I'll stop there and tell you what it says. So anger, this is your choice, Victoria. Anger, anguish, boredom, contempt. Stop me when you hear one that you want to go with, or what
Let's
you
do
heard.
contempt.
Contempt. So contempt. This is I just noticed this intently in a client this afternoon as well.
Okay.
Right? The distancing emotion. Okay? We rely on contempt to create psychological distance from a person, group, or object. Through contempt, we seek to deny affiliation with the people or objects. The feeling hate is a very strong version of contempt. We develop hate for those objects and people whom in some way contribute to our feeling bad about life or bad about ourselves. Do you see like this? And I was working with somebody on this one. I'm glad you picked it.
Okay.
Nice play,
Yeah.
right? Because he had such negative regard for a family member growing up, and it was creating all of this energy. And I'm telling you, it's a phobia. It's one of those situations where almost like, I know that there's the condition. We just said that. But how much of his life experiences were creating like this contempt that he had, this intense way of keeping people away. And we connected some of those dots.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You look weird.
I just feel like some of this is watering down a little bit.
What do you
the
mean?
emotion, like I understand the reframe and trying to make it seem like it's connected to a purpose and the function of the emotion. And I get like what the handout is doing.
Right.
But I feel like when I'm seeing like contempt in someone, it's not a distancing practice that goes well ever.
Okay.
It's
so
pretty insulting most of the time and somewhat hostile if you're practicing
Oh,
or
absolutely.
having contempt-filled emotions is all I'm saying.
Okay. Right. But think about it, Kasie, from that person's perspective who's dishing out that contempt.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It definitely will serve the purpose for that person dramatically sometimes, particularly when you fall into real hateful spots. And we do see this intensely in marriages a lot.
Got
right?
it. Oh,
You
I
get-
see what you're saying now.
Right.
Like it's not about like what we would say like these emotions help us
Right.
do. It's
Now
more
we're on
so
track.
okay, so it's more so like what it's doing for you in the moment
Right.
is like
Gotcha.
basically putting
Okay.
that forearm out and saying like, get
Right.
away from me.
And you don't
Got
even
it.
realize
Got
it,
it. Okay.
sometimes when you're doing that. But what your emotional system is doing is, for whatever reason, I don't feel safe. And I'm throwing this contempt out. Victoria, forgive me. I don't mean any of this.
Go
I'm
for
going to
it.
throw this out at Victoria. You're a small person that has no integrity in talking to us the way that you've talked to us today. I'm just contemptuous. This is going to put her out the door.
Yeah.
And that's what my
Peace
emotional
out.
system interpreted that will accomplish. Yeah.
Right. Like basically like you're trying to shut something down
Right.
or move on from it or move away from it.
Right.
Got it. Okay. I see it now.
Yeah.
I get it now.
So let's go a little further. You get to choose one. Disappointment, depression, disgust, dread, embarrassment, envy. Envy was a fun one. I
Envy.
thought you might stop there. I don't know why. Okay. This is the desire emotion, right? We feel envy for something that holds promise for validating, enhancing the self. It may lead to obsessional thinking, but we get obsessed with things and people that hold self-defining promise. So it's interesting, right? Like, I don't know, the way I take that is we're really looking for that validation. There's enviousness for, coveting what somebody else has. It's like, it has a purpose, right? Like it's
Yeah.
it's trying to feed yourself and get validated to feel okay. Like, I don't know. I love the way they're reframing. I'll let you guys check this out.
Yeah, I
'Cause
like that a lot.
I don't
I was gonna
usually.
say, do you usually attach stuff to the podcast, like show notes? or
Yeah,
anything?
we'll get it in the show notes
Okay.
kind of as well. But I was just saying for you guys, because I don't
Oh,
like
yeah.
handouts. I don't use them anymore. I don't keep them. The fact that I kept this one, dude, like it was
That
pretty
means
neat.
a lot.
Yeah, in my
Yeah,
world to me.
that makes a lot of sense. The way that you can connect to a person and kind of be where they are. in the moment. It's really about like being present with that feeling, right? And instead of seeing it as like a super overpowering negative emotion,
Right.
when you understand the purpose and the function,
What
then
is
you
it
can do something
driving?
about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Which perfect, right, Kasie? And I love that we were able to interact and we got off track and back on track because that's what people have been doing in their cars or their homes listening to
Sure.
this show, right? Like again, understand what's driving you emotions day to day in the day-to-day operation. Just stop. Just think, what is this operational for me? Allow it to be present and then work with it. Because you know what? You can always disregard it a minute from now if you want to again.
Yeah.
But
Very
if you
true.
let it be there, they really oftentimes are doing you a massive favor in your life. They're scary, they're uncomfortable, they're difficult. I feel like I'm doing my show summary up right now,
Sure.
ready to turn the mics off. But, like, allow that. It's such a missed opportunity when people numb out and don't allow that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that once you accept them, if they feel uncomfortable, then you can commit to change. But your comfort zone does not give you any growth.
I like that.
I want to highlight, before we get out of here, episode 173 and 174, the implicit bias shows that we did. It is right in stock barrel with this stuff. Your subconscious, your implicit bias, those shows dealt with this, and we're dealing with it again because it's part of the way that our bodies operate. We don't have a lot of time to get at, the insecurities that we talked about last week. We did a little bit with the layering, but, think about examples of emotions working for us. What we talked about last week with the EFT and what's going on in your marriage, chronic conversations, like that's what it's doing for you. Stop, pay attention to that cycle and figure out in a different direction what you're trying to get. Convey that to your partner and you'll connect a lot better, but that's so hard to do, I know. Trauma and the effects of trauma. Other examples. You were talking about that, Kasie, earlier. So there's, this is cool stuff because it's really happening all the time, day to day, and I hope that we've given you a little bit of an idea of what they're doing for you.
Yeah.
Closing thoughts, comments, guys, things that you're thinking?
I mean, I think our lives would be very dull and boring without emotions.
Wouldn't they indeed? She even says that like,
Sorry, I did say that very dull and boring. Yes.
What's the function of boredom?
you
on
could
that?
say, boredom, actually, where is that? Is that on there? We got to go there if we have it. I think we do. Boredom is the entertain me emotion,
Oh.
right?
Entertain me, guys. Come on.
Boredom indicates a lack of positive stimulation. Boredom compels us to seek an improved level of stimulation. Example, doodling.
Doodling. Yeah.
Doodling.
Doodling.
D-O-O-D. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Doodle.
little draw.
To
like
enlist
yeah.
others as a source of stimulation. That
Yeah.
serves a purpose.
That really makes sense for you, Victoria.
And with that, we're going to bid you adieu. Listen, take care. Have a great week. Appreciate you guys being here.
Of course.
Bye,
We'll see you
y'all.
soon.
Bye, y'all.